the American Composers Forum is one of the true beacons, one of the true foundational organizations for composers in the country and really in the world.
It brings together all the different voices that are happening in our time right now.
Having support from such a great organization from the start gave us a lot of credibility, and it just helped us do things that we wouldn't have been able to do.
American Composers Forum is, I think, one of the most generous and supportive organizations.
I can't imagine what my life would be without the Composers Forum.
The forum started as a collection of students at the University of Minnesota with an idea that they needed to get their music out and into the wider community.
I was actually one of the people who was in on the beginning. And I remember being on the floor of Libby Larson's living room, sitting around talking about what this might be. In the early days, Libby and Steve Paulus, of course, were the driving force behind it.
We had the same Russian history class on the West Bank, and we found ourselves walking back to the music department on the East Bank. And so we just fell into a friendship and realized that we had like backgrounds and a completely compatible desire to communicate by writing music. We realized that in order for us to grow artistically as composers, that we needed to hear the music. And we also realized, and this is important, we needed an audience. And so we just sort of naturally said, let's make an organization and get a phone number and an address, and let's start calling people up and let's start putting on concerts.
Bruce Carlson, who was an old friend, ran the Schubert Club. He called me and he said, I've got these two kids who are trying to do something with composers. And it was a pouring, raining day. And in walked two drowned rats, Steve Paulus and Libby Larson. And they sat down there and told me what they were trying to do, which was they had started this group called the Composers Forum to basically hear new pieces of music played and heard and recorded by them and their friends. And they asked me for $1,000, not me, but me as Dayton Hudson Foundation. And I said, you know, you're never gonna get off the ground with 1,000. Why don't you ask for 10?
The Minnesota Composers Forum actually became the American Composers Forum about 20 years later. But from its early beginnings, the forum has always been about connecting the composer to its community and to its audience. And it's been a 40-year trajectory.
Composers work in all different kinds of ways, but often their work is alone in their studio prior to going out and connecting with musicians and connecting with the audiences. But because of the nature of their work, it's really important to have an organization that's really looking out for the needs of the individual.
ACF is doing a large part in contributing to the sense of community. I have to say, since knowing about their commissioning project with the Jerome Fund, I've gotten to meet all of the New York-based composers that have received commissions. So I'm getting introduced to a lot more new talent, which is really great.
Most of the people that I've worked with in different projects and collaborations that I've been involved to have come to me through the connections I've made through the American Composers Forum.
In addition to seeking out commission funding, I also used to always check the ACF website for opportunity listings. Even if they weren't applicable to me as a performer, I liked to know what composers were up to.
Every year there has been something from American Composers Forum in my resume. There was some sort of project that I couldn't have been a part of, or an opportunity I wouldn't have known about if it hadn't been for the American Composers Forum.
If you live your life always with music in your head, there's kind of loneliness that comes along with it. But if you put a group of composers together, there's an intellectual community that feels much more than family. You feel at home in that community.
Move across America's back roads, and a wealth of local music emerges. Music that inspired the birth of a one-of-a-kind event, Continental Harmony. The idea was to take composers and place them in over 50 communities across the nation to write unique works of music for and about that place in the largest music commissioning project in U.S. history.
I think one of the hallmarks of our organization over the last 40 years has been the different ways in which we have connected composers with their audiences and with their communities. Our Continental Harmony program certainly did that in huge variety of ways over about 8 years. Our Faith Partners program puts composers in churches and synagogues, and not just individual churches and synagogues, but a consortium of 2 or 3, so that those communities themselves can work together through music.
In my own work, I'm very much aware that the composition is not complete until it is heard. And that could be an audience in a concert hall, but it could be in a bar, it could be on the street, it could be in almost any venue you could think of.
You need to do a lot of interaction with the composers and the performers in the audience so that there can be discussion and more of a sense of intimacy, with the composer and his or her process. The audience responds to that because this is a real person living today, reacting to the things that are happening in today's society, writing music. And that's a completely different experience than hearing the best Beethoven symphony.
Locally here in Minnesota, we have a lot of programs such as our Composer Conversation Series, which is a partnership with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. And so we're especially excited that on the 40th anniversary of this organization that we're also connecting composers nationwide through something called National Composer Night Out. Obviously a play on the National Night Out theme, because it's really our hope that people see that there are composers in all communities across this country, active artists who are working to create new work, and National Composer Night Out is a way to connect them from coast to coast on May 14th in a way that has not happened before.
I think the heart and meaning of ACF today is not different from what Steve and Libby hoped, and that was to give composers a chance to have their music heard. And I think the reason the forum has survived and been so successful is because it keeps coming up with new ways to do it.
We're alive in really changing times right now. Everything in the landscape of music and the arts is shifting radically, and I think that what the American Composers Forum is doing and how Innova runs its label is just so conducive to keeping the art form alive.
Producing great work that seemed to defy genre. There was great contemporary classical music and great jazz and great world music and a lot of music that just didn't fit into any category. I feel like Innova was actually ahead of the curve in seeing the direction of music on the whole.
And it really was an attempt way back in the 80s, before the internet, to take that product worldwide.
I started working with the American Composers Forum when I had discovered their commissioning program in partnership with the Jerome Fund. And around that time, I'd also started a new music ensemble called Hotel Elefant and had wanted to write for them. Having that help from the American Composers Forum gave us our first recording.
Public radio has been a very important part and partner of the Composers Forum and its work for now several decades. It started with a program called Composer's Voice. Now, of course, we have Composer's Datebook. What it does give you is a snippet of some really important moment in musical history that really says why all music was once new. And it really helps, I think, people stop for a second and say, I should listen. I should listen to this and give it a shot. The impact of some of our programming in the field of education has been really hallmarked by a program called BandQuest, a very creative way to connect high-profile composers who are really at the top of their field with kids who needed some really creative literature.
When I write a piece for middle school band, I really am thinking from the student level. I think about the educational goal for the ensemble. I think about educational goals of the relationship between the conductor and the ensemble. I'm also thinking right down to the individual level. Most importantly for me is that the students have the chance to be creative in the piece itself. I really am a big fan of ownership.
I didn't have that opportunity until I was in college, and here they are in 8th grade and they get an opportunity to work with someone who's willing to write that level piece for young bands and say, here, we're going to give you all the curriculum you need, we'll give you all the assistance that you need to help have this piece playable by your students, to have curriculum already developed for educators that are maybe uncomfortable saying, I don't think I can do this by myself.
BandQuest teaches music. They don't just teach band. That's what I love about what they do.
Of course the kids are challenged. They have to play a new piece. A lot of these composers are using techniques that the kids have probably never seen before. But the fact that the composers are also learning in the same environment, and the students can see them making adjustments when they hear something. I think a lot of them feel composers aren't real people, that they existed a long time ago, and they don't realize they are just like them.
I think the exciting thing about a 40th anniversary is actually looking forward. What the Composers Forum now is looking forward to is how it can serve composers and the communities in which they live in even new and different ways. We welcome a huge variety of composers who are in fields we don't even know how to describe. And I think the blurring of those boundaries is really the future of how we define the word composer as an organization.
I don't think either Steve or I would have envisioned that we would still be able to walk across that very same bridge. Bridge looks different, but it still bridges the East and the West Coast, the composer to the world. 40 years later, only now it's not two people walking across the bridge, it's thousands of people talking about our place in the world as composers.